A billion-dollar skyscraper, designed to redefine the New York City skyline, kept collapsing in every simulation. No one could figure out why until a girl everyone overlooked pointed out what the world-class engineers refused to see. It wasn't a lack of strength, it was a failure to listen. And the fatal flaw had been buried in the foundation from day one. If you're hooked by this incredible story of resilience and love, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below letting us know what city you're watching from. Now on with the story. The 40th floor conference room felt colder than it should have. Robert Miller stared through the glass wall at the lights of New York City, twinkling in the humid April night, his stomach twisting into tighter and tighter knots. At 52, he had built an empire in the commercial real estate development sector, erecting skyscrapers that reshaped the city's skyline. His firm, Miller & Associates, was synonymous with excellence and innovation. But now, facing a screen filled with red numbers and downward trending graphs, Robert felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: pure, absolute fear. The Resilience Tower was supposed to be his masterpiece. An 87-story skyscraper designed to withstand any climate adversity. Earthquakes, winds up to 125 miles per hour, extreme temperature fluctuations. The promise was clear: indestructible. Investors had poured $340 million into the venture. Trade publications were already heralding the building as a global benchmark in sustainable engineering. The completion date was set for December, just 8 months away. There was just one devastating problem. In every digital simulation, the building collapsed like a house of cards. 18 months. That's how long Robert and his team had been burning through cash, reputation, and sanity trying to figure out what was wrong. Structural engineers from 3 different countries had reviewed the calculations. Software was updated, algorithms adjusted, materials tested and retested. Each attempt cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Each failure drove home the feeling that they were missing something fundamental. Sarah Davis, the project's lead architect, sat at the table, her face pale, with dark circles under her eyes. At 41, she had a collection of international awards and critical acclaim. Her career had been flawless until this cursed project. Now Sarah could barely manage 3 hours of sleep a night. Her marriage had fallen apart 2 months ago. Her husband couldn't stand to see her consumed by an obsession that was leading nowhere. Across the table, David Chen, a structural engineer with 28 years of experience, nervously adjusted his glasses. He had bet everything on this project, turning down offers from competing firms to dedicate himself exclusively to the Resilience Tower. Now, with his wife pregnant with their 3rd child and their savings evaporating, David felt the weight of impending failure like a stone on his chest. Robert slammed his hand on the table, making the water glasses tremble. His voice came out hoarse, thick with a frustration that bordered on despair. "I don't want any more technical excuses. I don't want any more glossy reports explaining why we failed again. I want a real solution. I want someone who can see what we're missing." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but Robert cut her off with a sharp gesture. "If we don't figure out what's wrong in the next 48 hours, I'm shutting down the project. I'll return the investors' money, pay the contractual penalties, and close the doors to this company. I will not let my entire life's work become a market punchline." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Everyone knew Robert didn't make empty threats. He had built his reputation on meeting deadlines and delivering quality, even when it meant brutal personal sacrifices. But now, for the first time, he was willing to admit defeat. Sarah felt tears burn her eyes, but she swallowed them back. She couldn't break down there, not in front of everyone. David stared at his own hands, mentally calculating how many months he could support his family on what he had left. As the meeting dragged on in circles of desperation and restrained accusations, no one paid attention to the hallway outside. The polished marble floor reflected the cold light from the chandeliers, and the sound of smoothly gliding wheels announced the presence of John Smith, 47, a janitor who had worked in the building for 9 years. John had always been invisible. He moved through the hallways with his cart, collecting trash, cleaning glass, mopping the restrooms. The executives rarely greeted him. When they did, it was with a distracted nod, without really seeing him. John didn't mind. He knew his place in that silent, brutal hierarchy. He worked 3 different shifts to keep his daughter in private school and ensure she had the opportunities he never did. That night, however, John wasn't alone. Beside him, sitting on a makeshift stool in the corner of the hallway, was Lily, his 7-year-old daughter. The girl had large, observant eyes, her brown hair tied in 2 uneven pigtails that John had made with his trembling, unpracticed hands. Her school uniform was a little wrinkled, a faded pink backpack resting at her feet. John had no one to leave Lily with that night. The neighbor who usually watched her was sick, and the school had sent out a notice about a water main break that had cancelled afternoon classes. Bringing his daughter to work was risky. He could be written up, even fired. But he had no choice. The electric bill was late, the rent was due in a week, and missing this shift meant losing money they desperately needed. "Stay right here and be quiet, okay, sweetie?" John knelt to his daughter's level, his voice low and filled with worry. "Don't make any noise. If anyone asks, you tell them you're my daughter and I'll be taking you home very soon." Lily nodded, far too serious for a 7-year-old. She already understood that her father's life was hard, that every dollar counted, that they couldn't afford a single misstep. Ever since her mother had left them 2 years ago, running off to another state with a man who promised a better life, Lily had learned to be strong, not to complain, not to cry when she was scared. As John walked away to clean the floor's restrooms, Lily pulled a worn-out notebook and a case of colored pencils from her backpack. Drawing calmed her. It was her refuge when loneliness crept in, when the hours of waiting felt endless. She opened the notebook to a blank page and began to trace lines, shapes, structures that existed only in her imagination. But Lily didn't draw randomly. For the past few months, sitting in discreet corners of that building, she had watched. She had watched a lot. The architectural blueprints spread across conference tables, the schematics projected on the walls, the heated discussions between engineers and architects. Words like load, stress, displacement, and rupture had become familiar to her. Even without fully understanding their technical meanings, Lily didn't know she was absorbing knowledge. She just saw patterns where others saw numbers. She saw shapes where others saw formulas. That night, as she drew, she heard Robert's voice cut through the slightly ajar conference room door. "I want a real architect, someone who can see what no one else has seen." Something stirred inside Lily. She stopped drawing and looked at the door. She knew she shouldn't be there. She knew kids didn't go into important meetings with grown-ups. But something stronger than fear pushed her forward. Lily stood up slowly, leaving her notebook on the floor. She took one step toward the door, then another. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel the blood pulsing in her temples. The door was ajar. Lily craned her neck and saw those serious, tired, desperate people. She saw the drawings on the screen. She saw the building that couldn't stand up. And then, without thinking, without calculating the consequences, Lily raised her hand. Time seemed to freeze. Every eye in the conference room turned to the small figure in the doorway. Lily felt her legs tremble, but she kept her hand raised, just as she'd seen students do in school when they wanted to speak. Robert frowned, confused. Sarah blinked several times as if she was seeing a mirage. David adjusted his glasses, certain he was seeing things. "Who are you?" Robert's voice came out louder than he intended, laced with irritation and exhaustion. Before Lily could answer, John came running down the hall, his face a mask of panic. He grabbed his daughter's arm harder than he meant to, pulling her back. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Miller, for God's sake, I'm sorry." The words tumbled out, desperate. "She's my daughter. I didn't have anyone to leave her with today. She won't bother you again. I swear, please don't fire me. I need this job. Wait." Robert held up a hand, stopping the flood of apologies. Something about the scene bothered him. Not the child's presence, but her expression. Lily didn't look scared or ashamed. She looked determined. "Why did you raise your hand?" John tightened his grip on his daughter's arm, whispering through his teeth, "Lily, we're leaving now. Don't do this to me, honey." But Lily gently pulled free from her father's grasp and took a step forward. Her voice came out soft but clear. "Because I know what's wrong with the building." The silence that followed was almost tangible. Sarah let out a short, humorless laugh. David rolled his eyes, One of the technical assistants muttered something about wasting time. John felt his legs go weak. This was it. He'd be fired, humiliated, thrown out like a trespasser. How could he have been so careless? How could he have let his daughter put him in this situation? Robert, however, wasn't laughing. He watched Lily with a disturbing intensity. There was something in those childish eyes, a seriousness that didn't match her age. After 18 months of failure, after millions burned, after consulting the best experts in the country with no results, he was willing to listen to anything, even a 7-year-old child. Let her speak. Robert gestured for John to step back. Mr. Miller, she's just a kid. She doesn't know anything about... I said, let her speak. John took a step back, feeling cold sweat trickle down his neck. Sarah crossed her arms, visibly annoyed by this waste of time. David glanced at his watch, calculating how many hours of sleep he'd lose tonight. Lily walked to the table, too small to comfortably reach the surface. Robert pushed a chair over for her, and the girl climbed up, bringing her to the adult's eye level. She looked at the screen projecting the building simulations, studied the drawings for a few seconds, then pointed to the central structure. The building isn't wrong. Her voice was still quiet but firm. You're forcing it to stand still too much. Sarah let out an exasperated sigh. Structures need to be rigid to support a load. That's basic. Lily shook her head, as if disagreeing with a teacher. But the wind isn't always the same. When it changes, the building wants to move a little, but you put these things here, she pointed to the structural supports on the diagram. That don't let it, so they're all fighting. The wind pushes one way, the building tries to move, but the steel beams pull the other way. In the end, everything always breaks in the same place. David opened his mouth to argue, but something in what the girl said made him hesitate. He pulled out his tablet, opened the stress analyses, and began reviewing the rupture points in the simulations. Every single collapse, without exception, occurred in 3 specific regions of the structure, always the same ones, as if the building were being consistently strangled. This is ridiculous. Sarah stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. A child comes in here, points at a screen she doesn't even understand, and you're going to take her seriously. We've spent a year and a half reviewing every detail of this structure, every connection, every support, every... Sarah. David's voice came out strange, tense. Look at this. He turned the tablet toward the architect. On the screen, the stress distribution graphs showed exactly what Lily had described. Concentrations of stress at 3 specific points, the result of opposing forces meeting. The building was trying to oscillate naturally with the wind variations, but the rigid supports prevented this movement, creating an invisible battle that always ended in rupture. Sarah took the tablet with trembling hands. She zoomed in on the data, checked the calculations, cross-referenced them with previous simulations. Her face grew progressively paler. "It's not possible," she whispered, more to herself than to the others. "How did we not see this?" Robert moved closer, looking over her shoulder. His breathing was shallow. "So you're saying the problem isn't the structure itself, but how it reacts to external forces?" Lily nodded. "It's like when you try to hold a tree with a really tight rope. If the wind blows, the tree wants to sway, but the rope won't let it. So either the rope snaps or the branch breaks." The analogy was simple, almost childish, but it was devastatingly accurate. John watched everything in a daze. His daughter, the little girl he walked to school holding hands with, who still slept hugging a worn-out teddy bear, was standing there, explaining concepts of structural engineering to some of the most qualified professionals in the country. How was this possible? Sarah sat down slowly, the tablet still in her hands. She opened a new file and began to mentally redesign the support system, replacing rigid connections with joints that allowed for controlled movement. The previous simulations had assumed that absolute rigidity was synonymous with safety. But what if it was the opposite? What if allowing for calculated flexibility was exactly what was missing? "We need to test this." David was already on the phone, calling the simulation lab. "Now. We can't wait until morning." Robert watched Lily with a mixture of fascination and unease. He had built an empire by trusting in degrees, certifications, years of experience, and, now a child, a janitor's daughter, had just exposed the fundamental flaw his billion-dollar team couldn't identify. "How do you know this?" Robert knelt to get on Lily's level. "Who taught you?" Lily shrugged, a small, shy gesture. "Nobody taught me. I sit here with my dad sometimes, and I look at your drawings, and listen to you talk, and then I draw too in my notebook." "What notebook?" Lily looked at her father, silently asking for permission. John, still stunned, gave a vague nod of agreement. The girl hopped off the chair, ran into the hallway, and returned seconds later, carrying a worn-out notebook with faded cartoon characters on the cover. She placed the notebook on the table and opened it to the bookmarked pages. What Sarah saw made her gasp. Drawings, dozens of them. Complex structures, buildings that seemed to breathe, impossible curves that somehow made sense. They weren't random, childish scribbles. They were designs, ideas, concepts that defied conventional logic but maintained a disturbing visual coherence. My God! Sarah turned the pages one after another, each drawing more surprising than the last. This is brilliant. Lily bit her lower lip, nervous with all the sudden attention. She had never imagined her drawings would be valuable to anyone. They were just her way of passing the time while she waited for her dad to finish work. Robert flipped through the notebook with reverence, as if he were holding something sacred. A 7-year-old child with no formal education, no access to software or specialized libraries, had intuitively developed concepts that had cost his engineers millions not to discover. "Is there anything else you noticed?" Robert asked, his voice strangely gentle. "Anything else about the project?" Lily hesitated. She bit her lip harder, as if deciding whether she should speak. Then slowly she turned the pages of her notebook until she reached a specific drawing. It was different from the others. Darker. More unsettling. "There's this." She pointed to black marks that ran across the base of the drawn building. "I did this about 3 weeks ago because I saw the building like this in my head, like it was sick underneath." Sarah frowned. "Sick underneath? What do you mean?" "There's an empty place where there shouldn't be," Lily said softly, almost whispering. "A hole under the ground, and at night I hear a noise." The air in the room seemed to grow heavier. Robert felt a chill run down his spine. He looked at David, who was already pale, then at Sarah, whose fingers were trembling on her tablet. "What kind of noise?" Robert asked, his voice coming out quieter than he intended. Lily shrugged, seeming smaller than she already was. "Like machines and people talking. But only at night, when almost everyone has gone home. And one time I went down with Dad to take out the trash in the basement, and I saw a door that was never opened before. But when I went to look, Dad pulled me away." John ran a hand over his face, the memory returning with uncomfortable clarity. It had been 3 weeks ago, during his late-night shift. He had indeed seen that door ajar, light spilling from the cracks, muffled sounds coming from somewhere he couldn't place. But John had learned over the years that janitors don't ask questions. They don't meddle where they're not wanted. They don't risk their jobs for curiosity. But now, seeing the look on Robert's face, John realized that his silence would come at a high price. "You saw this?" Robert turned to John, his voice sharp. "You saw people working in unauthorized areas and you didn't tell me." I didn't know if it was authorized or not, Mr. Miller," John stammered, feeling panic tighten his throat. "I thought it might be the engineers running some test, something I didn't understand. I didn't want to get involved. Show me." Robert was already on his feet, grabbing his coat. "Now, show me this door." Sarah stood up too, the tablet still in her hands. "Robert, it's almost 10 p.m. We can't just go down there and—" "Of course we can." Robert cut her off, his voice hard. "If someone is doing unpermitted work in my building, I need to know. This could compromise all our permits, all our insurance. If there's an accident, if someone gets hurt, I'm legally responsible." David put his tablet in his backpack, adjusting his glasses with nervous fingers. "I'm going with you. If there's an undocumented structural alteration, we need to assess the risk immediately." 10 minutes later, the group was heading down the service stairs toward the sub-basement. Robert led the way, with John right behind him pointing the way. Sarah followed, with David behind. Lily came last, holding her father's hand tightly. The sub-basement had a distinct smell of damp concrete. The lighting was dim, with fluorescent bulbs flickering at irregular intervals. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the bare walls, creating the feeling that they were descending much deeper than they actually were. "It's over there." John pointed to a metal door at the end of the corridor, "but it's closed now." Robert approached, tried the handle, locked. He pounded on the door, the metallic sound reverberating through the space. Nothing. He pounded again, harder. "Is anyone in there?" Silence. Sarah looked around uneasy. Something was wrong with this place. She knew every inch of this project, had drawn every blueprint, every detail, but that door wasn't on any diagram she remembered. "David, do you have the sub-basement blueprint on your tablet?" He opened the file, zooming in on the area where they stood. The blueprint showed the corridor, the support columns, the ventilation ducts, but no door. "This shouldn't be here," David whispered, a note of panic creeping into his voice. Robert pulled out his phone and called the building's head of security. The conversation was brief and tense. 5 minutes later, 2 security guards appeared with a master key and tools to force the lock if necessary. "Mr. Miller, are you sure you want to open this?" The older guard, a man named Paul in his 60s, seemed genuinely concerned. "If there's something illegal going on, it might be better to call the police first." "Open the door, Paul." The guard sighed and inserted the master key. The lock clicked, but the door didn't budge. Something was blocking it from the inside. "I'm going to have to pry it." Using a crowbar, Paul and the other guard pushed until something gave way with a sharp crack. The door swung open slowly, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. Lily squeezed her father's hand harder. She didn't want to go down those stairs. Something inside her screamed that there was danger down there. Robert took a flashlight from one of the guards and started down. The others followed in silence, each step echoing like a funeral drum. The staircase was narrow, the concrete walls damp. After about 20 steps, they reached a chamber. What they saw made them stop in their tracks. It was a large space artificially excavated beneath the building's foundation. There were recent marks from heavy equipment, tracks of disturbed earth, abandoned tools, and in the center, supported by makeshift shoring, was a void that stretched for at least 30 feet in diameter. Sarah brought a hand to her mouth, stifling a cry. "My God, this is directly under the main tower." David approached the edge of the void, illuminating it with his phone's flashlight. The depth was staggering, and worse, the walls showed clear signs of instability. Hairline cracks spread like spiderwebs through the surrounding concrete. "Who did this?" Robert asked, his voice trembling with contained rage. "Who had authorization to dig here?" No one answered because no one knew. Sarah was already on her tablet, comparing the location with the original site plans, her face turned even paler. "Robert, there's something you need to know. When we bought this land, the geological survey mentioned an anomaly in the subsoil readings. An inconsistency the technicians couldn't explain, but the consultant we hired said it was an equipment error, nothing to worry about." "And you believed him?" "We all believed him," Sarah defended herself, her voice breaking. There was no reason to doubt it. The site passed all the approvals. David was kneeling near the void, examining the shoring. "These supports are recent, weeks, maybe days old. Someone has been working here, trying to stabilize something." Robert felt his head spin. 18 months burning money on simulations, while someone was secretly digging under his building. The pieces were starting to fit together in a terrible way. If there's a structural void directly beneath the foundation, that explains why the simulations always failed at the same points, David said slowly, processing the information. "The base is compromised. It doesn't matter how perfect the structure above is, if the foundation is sitting on a hole." Lily, who had remained quiet until then, let go of her father's hand and approached a side wall. There was something strange there. Markings that didn't look like they were made by modern excavation. "Look," she pointed. Robert shone his light where she indicated. The marks were old, very old, and there was something else, engravings on the surface, half erased by time and moisture. Sarah drew closer, touching the wall carefully. Her fingers traced the almost invisible lines. This isn't natural, this was built. Built? Robert frowned. Before our building? Long before. Sarah was using her phone's flashlight to get a better look at the engravings. These marks, they show construction techniques that haven't been used in decades. David joined her, examining the carved symbols. It looks like some kind of bunker or an old shelter, built when this area wasn't even developed. John watched it all with a growing sense of unease. He had worked in enough old buildings to know that New York was a city built in layers, new buildings on top of old structures, asphalt over cobblestones, history buried under concrete. But this was different. This felt like it had been hidden on purpose. Paul, the security guard, was sweeping the space with his flashlight when something caught his eye. "Mr. Miller, there's a door over there in the back." Everyone turned. Indeed, partially hidden by rubble and equipment, was a corroded metal door, the kind used in military installations. Robert approached with the others close behind. The door had an old locking mechanism, but time and humidity had done their work. With some effort, Paul and the other guard managed to force it open. The air that came out was foul, stagnant for decades. Sarah covered her nose, fighting back, nausea. But curiosity was stronger than the discomfort. Robert entered first, shining his light inside. It was a room, small, square, with reinforced concrete walls, and on the walls, covering almost every available surface, were technical drawings, blueprints, mathematical calculations scribbled by hand. Sarah entered behind him, her eyes scanning the drawings with growing fascination and horror. "This is impossible." "What is?" Robert asked, unable to interpret the symbols and numbers. "These drawings," Sarah touched the walls with reverence as if in a sacred place. "They describe exactly what Lily said, flexible structures, systems that respond to external forces without breaking. Impact absorption techniques that we've only started studying in the last few years." She turned to Robert, her eyes wide. "Someone drew this decades ago. Someone already knew." David was examining a specific set of calculations, his expression one of utter disbelief. "This here even predicts the building's response to earthquakes, the damping coefficients, the mass distribution. It's all here. Perfect." Robert felt as if the floor were disappearing beneath his feet. Someone, long before him, had solved the problem that had consumed 18 months of his life. Someone as brilliant as he was, ignored. And that person had left the answer buried here, waiting to be discovered. But by whom? And why? Lily stood in the doorway, her eyes scanning the drawings on the walls. There was something familiar about them, something that resonated with the drawings in her own notebook, as if the same invisible hand that guided her strokes had guided that person decades ago. "Dad," she tugged on John's sleeve, "there's another door over there." Robert followed the girl's gaze. In the darkest corner of the room, partially hidden by a rusted metal shelf, was another door, smaller, narrower. Something inside him said not to open that door. To go back, call the authorities, do things by the book. But Robert Miller hadn't gotten where he was by doing things by the book. He pushed the shelf aside, the metal groaning in protest. The door had no lock. It opened far too easily. And what was on the other side made everyone recoil. It was an archive, a tiny room with metal shelves deteriorated by time and humidity. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, yellow documents, rolls of blueprints protected in metal tubes. And in the center, on a makeshift table, was a black hardcover notebook, preserved inside a thick plastic bag. Sarah entered carefully, afraid the floor might give way beneath her feet. She picked up the notebook, opened it slowly. The pages were surprisingly well preserved. The first page had a date, March 15th, 1978, and a name, Theodore Cole, architect. "Who is Theodore Cole?" Robert asked, reading over Sarah's shoulder. "I have no idea." Sarah turned the pages with reverence. The notebook was a technical journal, filled with notes, calculations, drawings. But he was a genius. David pulled one of the boxes from the shelf, opened it carefully. Inside were official documents, letters, yellowed, newspaper clippings. He picked up one of the clippings. The date at the top read 1979. "Visionary architect proposes revolutionary buildings for New York City," David read aloud, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Theodore Cole, 34, presented a radical project yesterday at the university's School of Architecture. Buildings that adapt to their environment, structures that breathe with the city, foundations that communicate with the soil." Robert felt a shiver. Those words echoed exactly what Lily had said hours earlier. David continued reading, his voice growing more tense. The academic community reacted with skepticism. Professor Arthur Evans declared that such ideas are fanciful and lack a solid scientific basis. Cole's projects were rejected by the review board, which classified his work as science fiction engineering. Sarah closed the notebook, a lump forming in her throat. They ridiculed him. They destroyed his career. "There's more here." David picked up another clipping, this one from 1982. "Architect's body found at abandoned worksite. Theodore Cole, 37, was found dead at a construction site in the South Bronx. Authorities are investigating the circumstances." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Lily, watching from the doorway, felt an immense sadness tighten her chest. That man, Theodore, he knew. He understood what she understood, and no one believed him. Robert took the notebook from Sarah's hands, flipping through it urgently. The final pages contained detailed drawings of a building, a skyscraper that looked frighteningly similar to the Resilience Tower. "This can't be a coincidence," Robert whispered, mentally comparing the drawing to his own project. "The proportions, the base structure, even the location, it's almost identical." Sarah moved closer, analyzing the drawing. Her blood ran cold. "Robert, who did you buy this land from?" "From Peterson and Sons Construction. Why?" Sarah pointed to a note in the corner of the drawing. "Land acquired in partnership with Peterson Engineering. Construction planned for 1980. Robert felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "Are you telling me the company that sold me this land was Theodore's partner? And they never mentioned anything about this previous project?" "Not just that." David was reading another document, an old contract. "It says here that Peterson and Sons invested $200,000 in Theodore's project. But when the academic community rejected his work, they pulled their investment. The project was cancelled." "And Theodore built this?" Sarah looked around at the secret bunker. "He built this space to preserve his work, so that one day someone would find it and understand that he was right." Lily took a step forward, her voice small but firm. "He knew they would try to build here again, and he left the drawings to help." Robert ran a hand over his face, trying to process everything. If Peterson and Sons knew about this underground space, why did they sell the land without mentioning it? Why didn't they disclose that there were old structures buried here? The answer hit him like a lightning bolt. "They wanted the project to fail," Robert said slowly, anger rising in his voice. "If I had found this out sooner, I could have demanded a price reduction, or even cancelled the purchase. They sold me compromised land at full price." Sarah shook her head, still processing. "But that doesn't explain who's been digging here recently. Theodore has been gone for over 40 years. Someone discovered this place and tried to do something." Paul, the security guard, was examining the abandoned tools near the void. "These tools are marked with the Miller & Associates logo. Mr. Miller, someone from your company has been here." The impact of that information hit Robert like a train. Someone from his own team had found this space, had tried to do something, and had kept it a secret. "David." Robert turned to the engineer, his voice dangerously calm. "Did you know about this?" "Me? No. How would I know?" David backed away, his hands raised defensively. "Sarah?" "Robert, I swear I didn't know anything about this." The architect had tears in her eyes. "You have to believe me." Robert wanted to believe them, but 18 months of failure, millions burned, and now he discovered that someone from his company had been working secretly in the sub-basement. The betrayal hurt more than any financial loss. John, who had remained silent all this time, cleared his throat timidly. "Mr. Miller, if I may, I saw who was down here." Everyone turned to him. "You saw?" Robert stepped forward. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because I didn't know it was wrong, sir. I thought you had authorized it." John was trembling, but he forced himself to continue. "It was Mr. Taylor, the engineer who was fired last month." Robert felt the floor disappear from under his feet. Michael Taylor, one of his senior engineers, with 15 years at the company. Robert had fired him after an argument about excessive project costs. Michael had insisted there were unidentified structural problems, that they needed to investigate the foundations. Robert, pressured by deadlines and a ballooning budget, had interpreted it as incompetence and let him go. "Michael knew," Robert whispered, the guilt crushing him. "He found this place. He tried to warn me, and I fired him." Sarah pulled more documents from the box, looking for something that made sense. She found letters, several of them, written by Theodore to various authorities. Pleas for attention, begging them to take his work seriously, all rejected with polite but firm words. And then she found something that made her stop. A letter from 1979, addressed to Arthur Evans, the same professor who had publicly ridiculed Theodore. But this letter was different. It was personal, painful. "Arthur, you know I'm right. You saw the calculations, you reviewed the models. You said it was brilliant. Why are you now publicly saying it's fiction? What changed? What did they make you promise?" Sarah turned the page. There was a reply attached, handwritten, almost illegible. "Theodore, you need to understand there are larger interests at play. The city isn't ready for your ideas. The investors won't back something that challenges decades of established practice. I did what was necessary to protect the university, and you, drop this project before it's too late." David took the letter from Sarah's hands, rereading it several times. Protect him from who? From what? The answer came in the form of another document, found at the bottom of the box. An internal memo from Peterson Engineering, dated March 1980. Regarding the coal project, confirm cancellation as per the directive from our primary investors. The client, the price. Group will not approve financing for untested concepts. Prioritize return to conventional model. Robert felt his heart race. The Price Group, that name, I know that name. You should. Sarah had a more recent document in her hands, pulled from her own briefcase. They're our main investors. 40% of the capital for the Resilience Tower comes from the Price Group. The puzzle began to form in Robert's mind with terrifying clarity. The same group that had destroyed Theodore's project 40 years ago was now funding his. And if Robert's project failed in the same way, the Price Group would recover its investment through penalty clauses, ending up with the land and the rights to all the work developed. They knew, Robert said, his voice trembling with rage. They knew about Theodore, about this space, about everything. They sold me the land through Peterson, invested in my project, and then sat back and waited for me to fail so they could take it all. Lily, who had listened to everything in silence, took a step forward. But you're not going to fail, because now you have his drawings, and you have mine too. Robert looked at the 7-year-old girl with her uneven pigtails and wrinkled school uniform and saw in her a courage he thought he had lost long ago. You're right. He knelt to her level. We're going to make this work. We're going to use Theodore's work, your ideas, and we're going to prove he was right all along. Sarah wiped the tears from her face, her expression shifting from despair to determination. But we have a huge problem. The meeting with the investors is tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. If we don't present a concrete solution with data to prove its viability, they'll cancel everything. David looked at his watch. It was already past 11 p.m. We have less than 9 hours. It's impossible to adapt the entire project in that time. Not if we try to do everything the conventional way, Lily said, her voice surprisingly firm. But if we take Theodore's drawings and show that they work, How? Sarah asked, genuinely curious. How do we prove in 9 hours that concepts developed 40 years ago are viable? Lily thought for a moment, then her eyes lit up. We build it. A little piece so they can see. Robert frowned. Build what? A small building. But using Theodore's ideas. There's that old warehouse on the next block, the one that's going to be demolished. We can test it there. Sarah and David exchanged incredulous looks. Lily, that's... We don't have permits. We don't have time. We have 8.5 hours, Robert interrupted her, his voice carrying a decision that brooked no argument. And we have the tools, the knowledge, and now we have Theodore's drawings. Sarah, David, can you translate his concepts into a practical application? The two looked at each other. It was crazy, it was irresponsible, it was possibly illegal. Yes, Sarah answered first. We can. Then let's go. Robert was already leaving the claustrophobic room. John, do you know anyone who can help? Masons, welders, electricians, anyone trustworthy who would work tonight? John thought quickly. I do. I have some friends who work construction. Good men, but Mr. Miller, this is going to cost... I don't care what it costs, Robert cut him off. Make the calls. I need at least 10 people here in an hour. As they climbed the stairs back to the normal sub-basement, Lily held Theodore's notebook against her chest. She felt as if she were carrying something sacred, a responsibility that went beyond her father, beyond even Mr. Miller and his company. Theodore had been silenced, ridiculed, destroyed for daring to think differently. But his work had survived. And now, 4 decades later, a 7-year-old girl would be the bridge between the past and the future. If they could pull it off. 2 a.m. The abandoned warehouse on a side street looked like a concrete carcass against the dark New York sky. It had been evacuated 6 months ago due to structural issues and was slated for demolition. For Robert, it was perfect. A testing lab where no one would ask questions. John's impromptu crew had grown. 12 men were working under the glare of portable floodlights, carrying materials, prepping tools. They were masons, welders, electricians, people who worked overnight when needed, who didn't ask about permits and who trusted John's word. Sarah was kneeling on the ground, using the asphalt as a drawing board, translating Theodore's designs into practical instructions. David was testing materials, calculating resistance and support points. Lily watched everything, Theodore's notebook open beside her, comparing the old drawings with what was happening. The principle is simple, Sarah explained, to the crew, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. Instead of fixing the structure rigidly, we're going to create points of controlled flexibility. When wind or any other force hits the building, it can move slightly, redistributing the pressure. Anthony, a 50-year-old welder with calloused hands, frowned. Ma'am, with all due respect, a building that sways doesn't sound safe. But it is, Lily interjected, her voice small but confident. It's like when you're on a seesaw. If you let it move, you stay balanced. If you try to stop it, you fall off. Anthony looked at the girl in surprise. Over the years, he'd seen plenty of engineers and architects use big words to talk about simple things. But this kid did the opposite. Robert coordinated the operation with a feverish intensity. He knew this was his only shot. If the test failed, if he couldn't prove the viability of Theodore's concepts in 5 hours, he would lose everything. The company, his reputation, the project of a lifetime. John, did the sensors arrive? They're here, Mr. Miller. The kid from the lab dropped them off 10 minutes ago. David was installing small vibration sensors at strategic points on the structure. They would measure how the forces were distributed when they applied artificial pressure to the building. If Theodore was right, we'll see a uniform dispersion of energy, David explained to Robert. Instead of concentrating stress at a few points, the force will spread throughout the entire structure. And if he was wrong? David stopped working, looking directly at Robert. If he was wrong, we're going to break what's left of this building. And tomorrow, you'll have to explain to the investors why you destroyed someone else's property. Robert nodded, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. At 3:30 a.m., they began the tests. Using a small crane, they applied controlled lateral pressure to the modified structure. The sensors captured the data in real time, sending information to David's tablet. The first test was disappointing. The structure responded strangely, with irregular vibrations that didn't follow any identifiable pattern. Something's not right, Sarah analyzed the data, comparing it with Theodore's calculations. The response should be more fluid. Lily came closer, looking at the numbers on the screen. "Can I see?" David turned the tablet toward her. Lily studied the graphs for a few seconds, then pointed to the sensors on the structure. "I think one of the sensors is in the wrong place." "Impossible," David defended himself. "I followed the points marked in Theodore's design exactly, but not in my drawing." Lily pulled out her notebook, opening it to the page showing the building with the dark marks. "Look, there's a difference here." David compared the two drawings. Indeed, there was a subtle discrepancy. The sensor was 6 feet to the right of the point Lily had indicated. "Are you sure?" Robert asked, incredulous. "You're saying a 6-foot difference will change the entire result? In dynamic structures, 6 feet can be the difference between success and collapse," Sarah replied, already convinced. "Let's reposition the sensor." 15 minutes later, they ran the test again. This time the response was completely different. The numbers showed exactly what Theodore had predicted. Uniform energy distribution, gradual impact absorption, natural stabilization after the disturbance. The crew watched in silence as the building literally breathed with the applied pressure, flexing without breaking, returning to equilibrium without excessive oscillation. "My God," David whispered, staring at the data. "It works. It actually works." Robert felt a wave of relief and euphoria. They had proven Theodore was right, that it was possible to build differently, better, smarter. But the euphoria was short-lived. At 4:15 a.m., the complications began. First, one of the welders cut his hand on a piece of metal and had to be taken to the hospital. Then, a light rain started to fall, making the outdoor work more difficult. And then came the worst part. A city vehicle pulled up to the corner. "Shit," Robert whispered, watching a building inspector get out of the car. Someone called it in. The inspector approached, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression and a clipboard full of forms. "Good morning, I'm Inspector Paula Kane, Department of Buildings. We received a complaint about unpermitted work at this location." Robert stepped forward, trying to take control of the situation. "Good morning. I'm Robert Miller, owner of Miller & Associates. We're just conducting some pre-demolition structural tests. Do you have a permit for these tests?" Robert hesitated. He had no permit whatsoever. Technically, this was trespassing and performing work without a license. "We're operating under an emergency basis. The building poses an imminent risk and we needed to assess its stability before—" "Mr. Miller, I need to see official documentation," the inspector interrupted. "If you don't have the proper authorization, I'm going to have to issue a stop work order." Robert felt panic tighten his throat. 5 hours of work, the proof that Theodore was right, all threatened by bureaucracy. That's when Lily stepped forward. "Ma'am, can you explain something to me?" The inspector looked down at the small child, visibly confused. "What is it, honey?" "If this building is going to be torn down anyway, why is it a problem to test it first? Like when the dentist wiggles your tooth before pulling it out." The childish analogy made the inspector smile in spite of the situation. "Well, honey, there are rules that have to be followed even for buildings that are going to be demolished. But if the rules are to protect people, and if nobody's going to get hurt, and if the test will help build safer buildings later, could we maybe wait until morning to sort out the paperwork?" The inspector looked at Lily for a long moment. There was something about this child, a sincerity that disarmed any authoritarian impulse. "Who are you?" "I'm Lily. My dad is John, he cleans buildings, and I figured out what was wrong with the big building that couldn't stand up." "You figured it out?" Lily nodded seriously. "The building was trying to move, but they wouldn't let it, so it got sick and broke, like when you put a bird in a cage that's too small." The inspector looked around, seeing the makeshift operation, the men working carefully, the monitoring equipment. "You really expect me to believe a child solved a problem that engineers couldn't?" She didn't just solve it, Sarah approached, showing the tablet with the test results. She proved she was right. This data shows a structural efficiency 40% higher than conventional methods. The inspector examined the numbers, clearly impressed despite herself. This is unusual. Inspector Kane, Robert tried again, his voice carrying a desperate urgency. If you allow us to finish our tests, I promise to regularize all the documentation first thing in the morning, and I promise that if this method proves viable, it will be offered free of charge for all public works projects in the city. The inspector was silent for a long moment, weighing her options. On one hand, the rules were clear. On the other, there was something about this situation that intrigued her. Child who spoke about buildings as if they were living things. Adults working through the night to prove a theory. A man risking everything on an impossible bet. You have until 6 a.m., she said finally. At 6 o'clock sharp, you either have official documentation or I shut this all down. And if anyone gets hurt, the liability is all yours. Robert felt his knees go weak with relief. Thank you. Thank you so much. The inspector turned to Lily. And you, young lady, are you sure you understand what you're doing? Lily looked at the building, at the blinking sensors, at the men working carefully. I understand that sometimes people don't listen when you think differently, but that doesn't mean you're wrong. The inspector nodded, as if she understood something that went beyond words. Good luck, Lily. At 5:45 a.m., with 15 minutes to spare before Inspector Kane's deadline, they finished the final battery of tests. The results were unequivocal. Theodore's flexible structure not only worked, it exceeded all expectations. Robert looked at his exhausted team. Sarah had cement smudges on her clothes. David's glasses were fogged with fatigue. John and his men looked like zombies, but they had worked with unwavering precision. And Lily, little Lily, was sitting on the curb, drawing in her notebook while she followed every step of the process. We did it, Robert said, his voice breaking with emotion. We actually did it. David saved all the data to the tablet, preparing the presentation for the investors. The numbers are perfect, Robert. Not only did we prove Theodore's method works, but we've documented every step of the process. Sarah looked at the modified building, which now behaved like a living structure, responding to the morning breeze in an almost organic way. 40 years, she whispered. Theodore was 40 years ahead of his time. But as they celebrated, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The test had been too perfect, too fast, and the meeting with the investors was scheduled for 8 a.m. He looked at his phone. 2 hours to prepare the most important presentation of his life. 2 hours to convince powerful men that a 7-year-old girl had discovered the future of civil engineering. And then his phone rang. It was Michael Taylor, the engineer he had fired. The voice on the other end was tense, urgent. Robert, you need to listen to me. They know. The Price Group knows you found out about Theodore, and they are not going to let you present today. The line went dead. Robert stood frozen, the phone pressed to his ear, trying to process Michael's words. Around him, the crew continued to dismantle the testing equipment, oblivious to the fact that everything might be about to collapse again. Michael, are you sure about what you're saying? Absolutely. I'm in the parking garage of the Price Investments building. I saw 3 cars leave here 20 minutes ago. I overheard part of a conversation about neutralizing the morning presentation. Robert's blood ran cold. How do they know we found out about Theodore? I don't know, but I know they have detailed information about tonight's test. Robert, they will not let you prove that the method works. The call ended abruptly. Robert tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. His hands trembled as he put the phone away. What happened? Sarah approached, noticing the look of panic on his face. We have a problem, a very big problem. Robert gathered the team and quickly explained the situation. The reaction was a mix of disbelief and fear. Are you saying they might try to stop the meeting? David asked, nervously adjusting his glasses. Or worse, if they've gone so far as to sabotage our discovery, there's no limit to what they might do. John, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. Mr. Miller, what if we change the location of the meeting? To where? With 2 hours' notice, it's impossible to reorganize everything. The investors are expecting us in the company's conference room. Lily, who had remained seated on the curb drawing, closed her notebook and stood up. Then we bring the meeting to them. What do you mean? Sarah frowned. If they can't go to the room where you wanted to show them, you show them somewhere else, a place they don't expect. Robert looked at the 7-year-old girl, who constantly surprised him with simple solutions to complex problems. Lily, the meeting isn't just about showing numbers on a screen. We need a projector, a formal presentation, a proper environment. Why? The question caught Robert off guard. What do you mean, why? Why do you need all that? The building you tested is right here. The numbers are on Mr. Chen's tablet. If what you discovered is true, it doesn't matter where you show it. It'll be true anywhere. Sarah exchanged a look with David. The girl's logic was irrefutable. They had become so accustomed to corporate formalities that they had forgotten the essential truth. Practical results were worth more than sophisticated presentations. She's right, Sarah said slowly. If we bring the investors here, if they see with their own eyes how the structure responds, it will be far more impactful than any slideshow. But that's irregular. You don't hold an investment meeting at a makeshift construction site. Mr. Miller, John intervened, his voice carrying a conviction that surprised everyone. With all due respect, you spent 1.5 years doing things the normal way, and it didn't work. Maybe it's time to do things differently. Robert looked around. The sky was beginning to lighten, revealing a New York waking up to another chaotic day. In a few hours, he would have to bet everything on a strategy that defied decades of business protocol. Okay, he said finally. Let's do it. John, can your men get the structure ready for a demonstration? Yes, sir, it'll be ready in an hour. David, can you adapt the presentation for a mobile format? I can. The tablet has wireless projection. I can stream it to any screen or smartphone. Sarah, you call the investors. Move the meeting here. Make up any excuse. A field inspection, an on-site demonstration, whatever it takes. Sarah nodded, already reaching for her phone. But before she could dial, she was interrupted by the sound of screeching brakes. 3 black cars had pulled up in front of the abandoned building. Men in suits got out, walking with determination toward their worksite. Robert Miller? The man in the lead was tall, thin with graying hair, and an expression that accepted no arguments. I'm Dr. Anthony Price, chairman of the Price Group. We need to talk. Robert felt as if he'd been hit by a sledgehammer. Anthony Price himself, the man who had funded 40% of his project, was here at 6:30 in the morning, surrounded by assistants and security. Dr. Price, I wasn't expecting you. I imagine not. Anthony looked around, observing the equipment, the men working, the modified structure. I hear you've been conducting some interesting experiments. Robert forced himself to remain calm, but he could feel cold sweat trickling down his neck. Just viability tests, developing new technologies for the Resilience Tower project. New technologies, Anthony repeated, his voice laced with irony, based on the work of an architect who died 40 years ago. The impact of that sentence was like a punch to the gut. They knew everything, about Theodore, about the underground bunker, about the drawings they had found. Dr. Price, I can explain. No need to explain, Anthony interrupted. I know exactly what you've discovered, because I was there when Theodore Cole tried to present these same ideas to the academic community in 1979. Sarah felt her legs go weak. David swallowed hard. John instinctively pulled Lily behind him, shielding his daughter. You were there? Robert asked, his voice weaker than he would have liked. I was young then, a recent engineering graduate, working for my father at the family company. Theodore was brilliant, a visionary. His ideas could have revolutionized civil engineering. Anthony paused, his eyes scanning the modified building. But revolutions are dangerous. They destroy established markets. They ruin fortunes built on traditional methods. Robert finally understood. Theodore's destruction hadn't been an accident. It had been a premeditated professional assassination. You destroyed him, on purpose. We protected our investments. Theodore represented a threat to billions of dollars in contracts, equipment, and established methodologies. If his ideas had been accepted, entire companies would have gone bankrupt overnight. And now you're doing the same thing to me. Anthony smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Robert, you're a smart man. You've built a solid company. You have a good reputation in the market. Why would you throw it all away for the fantasies of a man who died a failure? Because those fantasies work. Lily stepped forward, out from behind her father. Her voice was small but firm. We tested it, we proved it. Theodore was right. Anthony looked at the child as if he were observing an interesting insect. And you must be the child prodigy who figured all this out. A janitor's daughter, isn't that right? John stepped forward, placing himself between Anthony and Lily. Leave my daughter out of this. John, is it? Anthony consulted a folder one of his assistants was carrying. John Smith, widower, works 3 jobs to support his family. Earns, according to my data, approximately $3,000 a month. John didn't reply, but Robert could see, his hands trembling with anger and fear. I have a proposal for you, John, Anthony continued. $50,000, cash, for you and your daughter to move out of the city. Start over somewhere else, far from New York, far from trouble. That's a bribe, Robert said, his voice hard. You're trying to bribe an honest man to silence his daughter. I'm offering an opportunity. John is free to accept or refuse. John looked at Lily, who was watching him with big, confident eyes. $50,000 was more money than he would see in 2 years of work. It was enough to buy a small house, give his daughter a better education, live with dignity. But it would also mean running away, abandoning the truth, letting Theodore remain forgotten. And if I say no, John asked, then I'll have to reconsider the cleaning contracts for all the buildings where you work. It would be a shame if those companies decided to switch vendors. The threat was clear. Take the money and disappear, or lose everything and disappear anyway. Lily tugged on her father's sleeve. Dad, remember what you always tell me, that we can be poor but we can't be cowards. John closed his eyes, feeling the weight of a decision that would change their lives forever. When he opened them again, there was determination in his gaze. Mr. Price, thank you for the offer, but I'm staying here, and so is my daughter. Anthony nodded as if he had expected that answer. I see. A pity. He turned to Robert. And you? Still insisting on this madness? The meeting is still on for 8 o'clock, right here, and all the investors will see that Theodore was right. What meeting? Anthony smiled again. There will be no meeting, Robert. Half an hour ago, my assistants called all the investors to inform them that there was an accident at the work site, that you sustained injuries, and the meeting has been cancelled indefinitely. Robert felt the world collapse around him. You can't do that. Of course I can. I'm the primary investor, and now that you've been officially sidelined for medical reasons, the project reverts to the direct control of the Price Group. Sarah stepped forward, her voice filled with despair. This is theft, illegal appropriation of intellectual property. It's business. Anthony began to walk away. The contract Robert signed is very clear about the penalties for delays and the conditions for transfer of control. Robert ran after him. Anthony, please, you've seen the test results. You know this works. Why not let the project go forward? Anthony stopped, turning one last time. Because I'm not going to make the same mistake I made 40 years ago. What mistake? I shouldn't have let Theodore live so long. I should have stopped him before he documented everything. The coldness of those words hit everyone like an electric shock. Anthony Price had just indirectly admitted to being involved in Theodore's death. You have 1 hour to clear this site, one of the assistants shouted. After that it will be considered trespassing. The cars sped off, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the acrid smell of burning rubber. Robert fell to his knees on the asphalt, the weight of defeat crushing any remaining hope. 18 months of work, millions in investment, the discovery of the century, all lost to greed and fear. Sarah was crying openly. David sat on the curb, his head in his hands. John hugged Lily, whispering apologies for not being able to protect her better. And then Lily pulled away from her father's embrace. It's not over yet. Robert looked up, seeing the small girl with her uneven pigtails, standing amidst so much despair. "Lily, it is over. They won." "No." Lily opened her notebook, showing a drawing she had made while Anthony was talking. It was a building, but not the Resilience Tower. It was something new, different, better. "It's only over if we give up." But Theodore didn't give up, not even when everyone said he was wrong. "And I'm not going to give up either." She looked at each of them. "We still have an hour, and we have something they don't have." "What?" Robert asked, not believing there could still be hope. "The truth." Lily looked at the adults around her, all dejected, defeated. She understood they had lost the official battle, that the men in suits had taken the money, the contracts, the opportunities, but there was something those men couldn't take: the knowledge. "Dad, do you still have that reporter's phone number?" John frowned, confused. "What reporter, honey?" "The one who came to the building last week, the one doing a story on construction. You said she was nice." John thought for a moment. Carla Ramirez, an investigative reporter for a local news channel. She had shown up the week before, researching a story on irregularities in public works. She had spoken with John for a few minutes, showing genuine interest in the workers' perspective. "I have her card. But Lily, why?" "Because if they don't want people to know the truth in a conference room, we'll tell everyone." Robert looked up, a spark of hope igniting in the midst of his despair. "Lily, are you thinking of leaking the story to the press?" "I'm thinking of showing everyone that Theodore was right, that you proved he was right, and that those bad men killed him for it." Sarah dried her tears, her mind starting to process the possibilities. "If we can publish the test data, the findings from the bunker, Anthony's implied confession about Theodore—" "They'll deny everything," David interjected, skeptical. "They'll say we're making it up, that it's retaliation for losing the contract." "Not if we have proof." Lily opened her notebook, showing all the filled pages. "I drew everything, every test, every discovery, and you recorded the data on the tablet." Robert looked at the 7-year-old girl, proposing a media exposure strategy that many seasoned executives couldn't formulate. "John, call the reporter now." John pulled the crumpled card from his wallet and dialed the number. After a few rings, a woman's voice answered. "Carla Ramirez?" "Ms. Ramirez, this is John Smith. We spoke last week at the Miller and Associates building." "John, I remember. How are you?" "Ms. Ramirez, are you still investigating irregularities in the construction industry?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Always. Why?" "Because we've discovered something huge, really huge, and we need someone to tell everyone before it's too late." "Where are you?" John gave her the address. Carla said she'd be there in 20 minutes. While they waited, the team worked frantically to organize all the evidence. Sarah digitized Theodore's drawings. David prepared a simplified technical report of the test results. Robert gathered all the documentation about the land purchase and the Price Group's involvement. Lily kept drawing, visually documenting everything that had happened in the last few hours. Her childlike perspective captured details the adults missed: the facial expressions, the atmospheres, the moments of tension and discovery. Carla Ramirez arrived driving a small, dented car with a camera and recording equipment on the back seat. She was a woman in her 40s, with brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and sharp eyes behind red-framed glasses. "John, what did you find?" Robert took the lead, telling the whole story from the first failures of the Resilience Tower to the discovery of the underground bunker and Anthony Price's confession. Carla listened in silence, occasionally taking notes or asking for clarification. "You have evidence for all of this?" Sarah showed her the tablet with the test results. David explained the technical data. Robert presented the documents proving the connection between Theodore and the Price Group. "And you," Carla knelt to Lily's level, "you really discovered the solution that the engineers couldn't find?" Lily nodded seriously. "The building just wanted to move a little, but they wouldn't let it, so it got sick and broke." Carla looked at the drawings in Lily's notebook, then at the modified structure of the abandoned building. "Can you show me a demonstration?" "I can." Lily led her to the points where they had installed the sensors. Look, when we push here, the numbers on Mr. Chen's tablet show that the force spreads out, instead of breaking in just one place. Carla watched the test, filmed the demonstration, and interviewed each member of the team. Her expression grew progressively more serious as she understood the magnitude of the discovery and the conspiracy behind it. "This is a bombshell," she said finally. "A revolutionary technological discovery, a decades-long conspiracy, a corporate assassination, all centered on a child prodigy. This is the story of my career." "How long will it take you to publish?" Robert asked anxiously. "For a story of this importance, I need to fact-check, consult independent sources, confirm technical data, at least a week." "We don't have a week," Sarah explained about the 1-hour ultimatum from Anthony's assistants. Carla thought quickly. "I have an idea. Do you know the show NYC Now on WNBC?" Robert nodded. It was a popular morning show with live interviews and reports about the city. "The host, Jessica Lange, is a personal friend of mine. If I call her now, we can get you a live spot on the 9 o'clock show." "Live?" Robert felt his stomach churn. "Carla, I'm not good on television. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I stammer? Then you won't be the one talking?" Carla looked at Lily. "She will." Everyone turned to the girl, who was still drawing calmly. "Lily, would you be brave enough to tell your story on television? To millions of people?" Lily stopped drawing and looked at her father. "Dad, if I talk on TV, will everyone know that Theodore was right?" "They will, honey. And no one will be able to hide the truth anymore. No one." Lily closed her notebook and stood up. "Then I'll talk." Carla was already on the phone with the show's producer. The conversation was quick but intense. On the other end, Jessica Lange immediately recognized the story's potential. "Confirmed," Carla hung up. "You have 40 minutes to get to the studio. Jessica is leading the show with this story." The rush was intense. Sarah quickly combed Lily's messy hair, John changed out of his work uniform into a cleaner shirt, and Robert gathered the most important documents into a briefcase. On the way to the studio in Carla's car, Lily looked out the window, watching New York wake up to another day. Soon she would be speaking to all those people, telling them about Theodore, about buildings that knew how to move, about powerful men who hid the truth. "Lily, are you nervous?" Sarah asked, noticing the girl's unusual silence. "A little, but mostly sad." "Sad, why?" "Because Theodore won't get to see it. He always wanted people to know, and now they will. But he's already gone." The simplicity of that observation moved everyone in the car. A 7-year-old child understood that this fight was bigger than her, that it transcended personal or corporate interests. It was about honoring the memory of a man who had been silenced for thinking differently. At the WNBC studio, the production crew worked at a frantic pace to prepare the segment. Jessica Lange, an experienced host in her mid-40s, greeted the group with professionalism and genuine curiosity. "Lily, you know that a lot of people will be watching. Kids your age, entire families, workers like your dad. Do you want to tell them about what you discovered?" Lily nodded. "I want to talk about Theodore, and about how buildings can be our friends instead of our enemies." At 9 o'clock sharp, the show went on the air. Jessica opened, briefly explaining the extraordinary discovery that was about to be revealed. Then she introduced Lily. "With me now is Lily Smith, age 7, who has made a discovery that could revolutionize civil engineering in America." Lily, sitting in a chair that was too high for her, her feet dangling in the air, looked directly into the camera. "Hi, I'm Lily, and I want to tell you about a very smart man named Theodore." For the next 15 minutes, Lily told her story. Simple, direct, without complicated technical terms. She talked about buildings that got sick when they couldn't move, about buried drawings that no one wanted to listen to, about bad men who would rather make money than save lives. Sarah supplemented with technical data. Robert explained the economic and social implications. John spoke about how his daughter had always been different, always saw things others didn't. But it was Lily who touched hearts. When asked what she hoped would happen after this revelation, she replied, I wish they would build a school the way Theodore wanted. A school that moves with the wind and doesn't break when the ground shakes. A safe school, where poor kids like me can study without being afraid. The segment ended with Lily showing her drawings to the camera, explaining how she saw structures as living things that needed care and understanding. When they left the studio, Robert's phone was ringing off the hook. Journalists, engineers, architects, investors. The story had gone viral on social media within minutes, but the most important call came from a number Robert didn't recognize. "Robert Miller, this is Dr. Helen Cardoso, President of the American Society of Civil Engineers. I just watched the program. We want to talk to you, and to the girl, today." "About what?" "About how to implement your findings in all of the country's infrastructure projects." Robert looked at Lily, who was playing with John in the back seat of the car. This small child, a janitor's daughter, had just changed the future of American engineering. And across the city, in the offices of the Price Group, Anthony watched the interview's fallout with a mixture of rage and involuntary admiration. He had underestimated a 7-year-old girl, and now he would have to deal with the consequences. 6 months later, Lily stood in front of a building that seemed to breathe. It was the first school built entirely with the Theodore Cole method, officially named adaptive architecture by the international scientific community. The walls curved gently, as if made of organic material. The windows adjusted automatically to the wind's intensity. The entire structure danced almost imperceptibly with the natural forces, strong precisely because it allowed itself to be flexible. "Theodore Cole Elementary School," read the golden plaque at the entrance. Below, in smaller letters, "The world's first school built with adaptive architecture, a project developed by Lily Smith, age 7, and team." John held his daughter's hand, still not quite believing everything that had changed. He no longer worked as a janitor. Since the story went public, dozens of offers had poured in. Universities wanted to hire him as a consultant on the blue-collar perspective in civil engineering. Companies offered supervisory positions. But John had chosen something different. He became the first operational safety coordinator for the newly created Theodore Cole Foundation. "Dad, remember when we thought we'd never have our own home?" Lily looked at the residential building across the street, where they now lived in a 3-bedroom apartment, a gift from the foundation. "I remember, honey, feels like another lifetime." Across the square, Robert watched the scene with a smile of deep satisfaction. He had lost the Resilience Tower as expected. The Price Group had taken over the project and tried to implement it using conventional methods. The result was a spectacular failure. Cracks appeared in the structure before the building was even finished. The project was permanently shut down, resulting in losses of over $400 million. But Robert didn't care. Miller and Associates was now the world leader in adaptive architecture. Contracts were coming in from every continent. Governments, universities, and international organizations all wanted to implement the discoveries of Lily and Theodore. The company had grown 5-fold in 6 months. Sarah approached, carrying a folder full of new projects. "The proposal from Japan was approved. They want us to redesign Tokyo's anti-seismic building system using our methods." "And is Lily's school ready for the opening?" "More than ready. The stress tests exceeded all expectations. This school can withstand winds of up to 155 miles per hour and an 8.5 magnitude earthquake without suffering structural damage." Robert watched Lily run across the schoolyard, intuitively testing the floor's response to her steps, as she always did with any new structure. "Does she still draw?" "Every day. Yesterday she showed me a design for hospitals that adapt to the number of patients. The walls expand when there are more people and contract when there are fewer. It's brilliant." David joined the group, taking off his glasses to clean them. "I just got the data from the first phase of tests on the redesigned Resilience Tower. Using Theodore's method exclusively, the structural efficiency is 340% higher than the original design. And the timeline? 9 months to completion, half the time it would have taken with conventional methods." While the adults discussed numbers and projects, Lily ran back to her father. "Dad, can I tell you a secret?" John knelt to her level. "Of course, honey. I talk to Theodore sometimes." John felt a shiver, but he kept his voice calm. "What do you mean, Lily?" "Not for real, just in my head. But when I'm drawing new buildings, it feels like he's right there next to me, helping me, showing me how to do it better." John hugged his daughter, understanding that this feeling was something beyond the rationale. Lily had become the bridge between the present and Theodore's interrupted work. It was as if his creative energy had found a new way to express itself through her. Across the city, in a stark, dimly lit room, Anthony Price signed the last of his asset transfer documents. The investigation sparked by Lily's television appearance had uncovered a web of corruption stretching back decades. Fraudulent contracts, overbilled projects, the systematic silencing of dissenting voices in engineering. But the final blow had come from where he least expected it. Michael Taylor, the engineer Robert had fired, revealed that he had secretly recorded several compromising conversations with executives from the Price Group. The recordings featured Anthony admitting not only to the sabotage of Theodore's work, but also to his active participation in the destruction of the architect's career. "Mr. Price, the lawyer, is waiting to discuss the terms of the plea deal." His last remaining assistant, a nervous young man who had stayed loyal even after everyone else had abandoned ship, spoke too quietly. "How many years?" 8 years of house arrest, full restitution for all damages caused, a lifetime ban from participating in any civil engineering project. Anthony nodded. It could have been worse, much worse. Public opinion had been clamoring for harsher punishment. Families of workers who had been harmed by poorly constructed buildings wanted full justice, but the lawyers had managed a deal. And the company? Dissolved. The assets will be auctioned off to pay the settlements. Anthony looked out the window of the office he would soon leave forever. Outside, he could see a construction site where a new building was going up. A building with curved lines, a flexible structure, windows that adjusted on their own. A building made with Theodore's technology. Ironically, the city was transforming into exactly what Theodore had dreamed of 40 years ago. At the Theodore Cole Elementary School, the opening ceremony drew hundreds of people, politicians, engineers, journalists, but mostly families, from the neighborhood, who would finally have a safe, modern school for their children. Lily was called up to cut the inaugural ribbon. She held the golden scissors, looked at the assembled crowd, then at the plaque with Theodore's name. "Before I cut the ribbon, I want to say something." The microphone was adjusted to her height. "I want to thank Theodore for being brave, for not giving up even when everyone said he was wrong. And I want to say to all the kids here, it's okay to think differently. It's okay to have ideas that grown-ups don't understand. And that doesn't mean you're wrong." She paused, looking specifically at the children in the audience. "When you grow up, remember Theodore. And remember that sometimes the best ideas come from the people everyone thinks don't know anything." Lily cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted in applause. The school doors opened for the first time, revealing wide, bright hallways, classrooms with acoustically adjusting walls, and a science lab with an anti-seismic structure. Later, after the crowd had dispersed and the school grew quiet, Lily walked alone through the empty corridors. She could feel the structure around her, the almost imperceptible movement of the walls responding to the wind outside, the soft whisper of the adaptive ventilation system. She stopped in front of a portrait of Theodore installed in the main entrance. It was an old black-and-white photo, showing a young man with intelligent eyes and a hopeful smile. "Hi, Theodore," she whispered. "We did it." At that moment, a gentle breeze came through the open windows, making the curtains sway. The entire building seemed to take one deep breath, as if waking from a long sleep. Lily smiled. 3 years later, at the age of 10, Lily became the youngest person in history to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, shared with the Theodore Cole Foundation. The committee's justification was clear: for revolutionizing global architecture, making construction safer and more accessible, saving countless lives, and proving that genius can emerge from anywhere at any age. At the ceremony in Stockholm, Lily wore a simple blue dress and carried the same worn-out notebook where it had all begun. When she took the podium to give her speech, she didn't talk about awards or international recognition. She talked about a man who died without seeing his ideas recognized, but who never stopped believing. He was right. She talked about the importance of listening to voices that think differently, and she ended with a promise. As long as I live, I'm going to keep drawing, and I'm going to teach other kids to draw too, because the world needs more people who see buildings as friends, not as enemies. The audience rose to its feet in an ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. That night, in New York, John watched the live broadcast of the Nobel ceremony. Beside him, in a golden frame, was the photo of Lily cutting the ribbon at the first Theodore Cole School. His phone rang. It was Sarah. "John, are you watching?" "I'm watching. Our little girl, on top of the world." "It's not just that. They just announced that the adaptive architecture method will be mandatory for all public construction in the United States starting next year." John smiled, remembering that early morning 3 years ago when Lily had raised her hand in a conference room, changing their lives forever. And to think, it all started because she wanted to help a sick building. On the other end of the line, Sarah laughed. "Does she still say she talks to Theodore? Every night, says he's proud. He is, wherever he is, he is." John hung up the phone and looked out his apartment window. Outside, New York glittered under the night sky. But it was a different city now, safer, more humane, built with the wisdom of a man who died misunderstood and redesigned by the intuition of a girl who refused to accept that things had to be the way they had always been. And somewhere between the past and the future, between Theodore's dreams and Lily's reality, the truth had finally found its place in the world.